Today's dialogue is very close to our hearts because it's been something that we've been seeing through our work over the last couple of years. Asmita and I have seen it for longer in our classrooms as educators, and it's just about the impact that consuming the news has on people's mental health. Um, um, I've already mentioned a little bit about what we do, but at Via News DD, our focus is to ensure that we're keeping kids aware of what's happening around them, giving them the skills and the know-how they need to navigate the sheer world of media that we choose or even choose not to surround ourselves with, and to give them a way for them to be able to communicate what they're feeling, thinking, what they want to do with the rest of the world. And that's where our focus on journalism comes in. But that's a little bit about us. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the moderator for today, and she'll take the discussion forward. It's my privilege to introduce Asmita. She's the founder of Via News DD. She's the reason why I am here and why you all are here. She plays a big part in getting us started on this mission of helping educators take the news to their classrooms, of helping students navigate the news without feeling overwhelmed or confused or sad or angry. So yeah, it's my privilege to welcome Asmita. Asmita, take us forward.
Thank you, Sukriti. You're very kind. Just to get us started, Sukriti has already spoken about what we do at Via News DD. But to add a little bit more to that perspective is my own challenge and experience of navigating the news. I know back in 2020, when the CA and NRC protests were raging, the pandemic was just about taking off. The news was a dark place at the time. And I was having these conversations with my students and realizing that a lot of them are believing and propagating these WhatsApp news forwards. I saw the polarization in the news play out in the classroom within my students. And that honestly really scared me. Which is why we started Via News DD just as a newsletter for students to have an alternative way to consume the news. And as we wrote a couple of editions of the newsletter and interacted with students, we realized that no amount of alternate news is going to solve this problem, right? There is this whole ginormous ecosystem of media that's feeding us all kinds of information. And us writing this newsletter is just a small blip in that ecosystem, which made us realize that we need to equip young people with the skills to critically look at that media and say, hey, is this good for me? Is this true? Is this accurate? Where is this coming from? How does this enrich my life? And so on. Which is why, as Sukriti pointed out, this discussion is really close to our hearts. More than anything else, I'll tell you honestly, this is for us to understand how we can ensure that our work helps students navigate the news, particularly without losing their peace of mind. And I'm very grateful to all of you for being here on this Sunday morning. And without further ado, I'm going to start introducing the experts that we have on the panel today. I would love to start with Advait, who's the one and only student on the panel. So no pressure, Advait, but we're really relying on your wisdom and your perspective to understand how students are feeling. Advait, to tell you a little bit about Advait has been a student reporter at Via News DD. He has been a participant in the Reimagining Media program as well as the internship program. He's a student at Oak Ridge International School, Bangalore. He's a published author, enjoys reading, playing basketball, listening to music, and also playing the drums. Advait, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself and also to share with us your opening statement, to tell us what your perspective on the topic is. Over to you, Advait.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? All right. So millions of people consume the news every day. So it can be found online in newspapers, and it can be shared by simply talking to people. So the information that we receive from reading the news varies, and it can have many impacts on what we think as well. This means that basically the news has a great impact on our feelings, and more specifically on our mental health. So negative, biased, and repetitive news are not uncommon nowadays. In fact, during 2020 and 2021, many people, including me, noticed that the news is getting repetitive and negative. There were countless articles that were solely focused on COVID-19 and the pandemic spreading all around the world. After getting the same information over and over again, many people simply stopped reading the news or started avoiding it. This is why I think the news can influence our mental health, and it's very important how the information is consumed as well. An example of this in 2020 was in my class. Many people, after reading the newspaper that we were given, started freaking out just because of COVID-19 and how much it was overstated. And day after day, there's so many articles in the news. Their reactions just kept getting worse, basically, and they started avoiding the news. So that's an example of how it can have an impact on our mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Advait, and thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things that really stood out to me from what you said was the point you made about news avoidance and how the negativity in the news can be a big deterrent from particularly a young person engaging with the news, or anybody for that matter. I'm not sure I count as a young person, but I've definitely struggled. But thank you so much for bringing in that perspective, Advait. I'm going to come back to you with more questions. But before I do that, I'm going to quickly welcome Soumya. I think it would be great to hear from Soumya a little bit on the issue before we move on to the rest of the panelists. And I'm going to give a quick introduction to Soumya, but Soumya, please feel free to add to this because I know your body of work is really, really rich, and I'm not sure we will be able to do justice to it through this introduction. But just for everyone to know, Soumya is the founder of Dhyana and a trained psychotherapist and meditation teacher. She's an alumnus of the Lady Shri Ram College for Women, and her vision is to simplify well-being and allow people to create space within through conversations, movement, and mindfulness. Thank you so much for joining us, Soumya. Over to you.
Thank you, Asmita, and thank you, Advait, for sharing that. I think this is a very important topic that Via News Didi has decided for today, and I just want to talk about two basic things. One, while it is extremely important to be aware of what is happening in the world outside, like Advait pointed out, these days we're so connected, there's so much consumption that's happening that it's equally important to balance that awareness with awareness of what is happening on the inside. What ends up happening for us because of this hyperconnectivity mode that we are in at the moment is you might start experiencing a sense of overwhelm, a sense of dread. So going back to the example of, let's say, if we take the example of what was happening during the pandemic, a common thing that therapists across the world noticed, which was happening, is something known as vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is when someone else is going through pain, I read about it on my WhatsApp story, or I receive a message, or I read about it on InShots, and I start feeling the same pain in my body, the same sort of overwhelm. And what that does to me is it dysregulates my nervous system. And now we know through research that a dysregulated nervous system, a nervous system which is feeling off balance, is what leads to most mental health issues. So I think while consuming news, it's very important to be aware of what is it doing to my system. Am I reaching a stage where I'm beginning to feel overwhelmed or burnt out because of the same? And if I am, what are some things that I can do to start feeling better and calm myself down before I enter that rabbit hole of more consumption and more overwhelm and more dread? I'll pause here.
Thank you for sharing that, Soumya. I think what you really did, at least for me particularly, was give us the right words to describe how we were feeling. When you said, there's an importance of the awareness or to know what's happening outside, but to balance that with what's happening inside. And I just didn't know that the term for it was vicarious trauma. So thank you for educating us. In fact, if I could add, we use a case study very often of the Boston Marathon bombing. And there were a couple of researchers who decided to study the impact of it on people, right? Who's the worst affected in terms of stress, anxiety, and trauma from that particular accident, that incident that took place. And of course, the worst affected were the people who were at the marathon, at the bombing. But what they found interestingly was the most affected category after that were people who consume 6 to 8 hours of news on the subject. And that's really what I connected vicarious trauma with as well. So thank you for sharing that. Before I come back to you with more questions, I'm going to quickly move on to our next panelist. I'm going to welcome Tina at this point. I think that it would be great to hear from you after we've heard from Soumya on how we need to balance our awareness of what's happening in the outside world, i.e. news, with what's happening inside. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Tina. Tina is a senior correspondent with The Print. Along with features, she has a keen interest in mental health, films, and literature. She loves to cook, read, and write when not working. Tina, welcome to the conversation, and we'd love to hear from you now.
Thank you so much. So I was listening to Soumya and I could sort of relive every moment from 2020 because interestingly, I'd come back to journalism from teaching in 2020 February. And I always laugh and say that I have really bad timing because a month, I think exactly 2 weeks after I joined, the first thing that happened was the Delhi riots. And I used to run the live blog at that point of time. I used to handle the social media. So when we're talking of mental health, I'm just giving you a sort of first-hand experience of what it was doing to me, even though I'm part of news, because often that sort of gets, I think, sidelined. The impact that it has on people, yes, it has been spoken about, but the kind of impact it has on the people who are also reporting is often, not thought of because it's understood that it's our profession, so we should be able to deal with it. Most of us had been young journalists who, even though we had been working on and off with journalism, we did not have probably even training to handle that kind of trauma for reporters who went out on the streets covering Delhi riots. And, probably 3 weeks after that, it was lockdown. And all of us were stuck in our homes. Most of us were people not from Delhi. So there were additional pressures on us where we were struggling to survive like the rest of us. And we were doing, so again, we became essential workers, which meant we were doing 6 days, sometimes 7 days of work, 12 to 13 to 14 hours. So I think that is when also our mental health started getting affected in ways that we had not anticipated. So here, what I would just like point out and maybe come back to later is the fact that while we are talking about the people who are consuming news and their mental health, interestingly, it's also the mental health of the people who are giving you the news. So there's a relationship there as well, because if you are not healthy in your head at the point when you are delivering a news, there is no way of doing it in vacuum, no matter how good a professional you are. It affects your writing. It affects the way you're using certain kind of language. It affects the editors who are editing your copies. There's layers to what news is also coming to you. So before I even moved to, what news was doing and what kind of news was going out and whether or not it was actually should have been put out, I would say that there were also humans working behind putting those news with their own multiple pressures. And I don't know if you remember, this industry saw a lot of job cuts around the time. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the people who are also putting out the news, there was a lot of things happening behind the screen, which sometimes need to be really understood, I feel, when we are talking about mental health and reporting.
Thank you. That's exactly the perspective I was hoping that we'd get to hear about, because you're absolutely right when you say that there's not a lot of it. I mean, had it not been for this conversation with you, I don't think I would have been as educated about what it means to be reporting on traumatic stories, right? So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. And I'm hoping to come back to you with a lot more questions on what we can do about this. But before we get to that, I'm going to quickly invite Hafsa to bring in her perspective as an educator. To tell you a little bit about Hafsa, Hafsa's passion for humanities began when she studied history in college, enabling her to make sense of the world around her. She began teaching history and political science in a secondary school via Teach for India. For the past 7 years, she has been training teachers and developing curriculum to help students learn transferable skills. Hafsa, over to you.
Thanks, Asmita. I think I just want to start off by saying, and echoing what Advaita also said at the beginning, that our children and our students are consuming large amounts of news. And like the system is overwhelmed with that information. And sometimes I feel like in the education space, especially as teachers, some of the news topics, because they're so politicized, they become so controversial to discuss in class that we almost like want to wish them away. Like I remember as a student, the only time we spoke about the caste system or caste-based violence was that this was a bad thing that happened many years ago, and we shouldn't do it anymore. But very seldomly was the realities and the everyday news. Nobody helped me consume that. So I feel like as educators, it's really important for us to be aware that our students are going to consume news. And like you mentioned, what can we, like what tools and resources can we give them to consume that in a way that doesn't paralyze them, but hopefully builds compassion and helps them move forward with the information that they're having. Yeah.
Thank you for adding that. I think that's really the million-dollar question, right? What tools can we give students, young people, and pretty much everybody who's consuming the news and feeling overwhelmed by it? And I'm really glad that we have a journalist and a mental health professional and an educator and a student here to help us arrive at that answer. And speaking of arriving at answers, I'm going to introduce very quickly the second educator on our panel, Namika. Namika, it's really good to have you here. Namika is a school teacher teaching a wide variety of subjects and also an experienced counselor. She's curious by nature, loves to read, explore new artistic ideas in her journal, and in her spare time, she can be caught drinking coffee and reading research papers. Namika, over to you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So these are the vital questions, I think, over the years, since we are talking about COVID a lot. So these are the vital questions that come first. Can you hear me? Can you see me? And news, I think, like as a very fresh educator, I've come to realize that we just talked about that, some core topics like religion, politics, and teaching in a state like Punjab, these topics are very sensitive and can be very hard to tackle. And during the COVID times, we understood that how news can be very challenging. I was a student at that time, and I clearly remember making a point that in the morning I will not check the news. Otherwise, we were always glued. Okay, what are the numbers? We were uh, so particular about numbers, that what are the numbers today, and which was pretty sad. And even now, I believe that that space is, maybe again, when the word COVID resurfaces, we are taken aback that, okay, do we have to prepare for something else now? Do we have to go a step further? What will be the next thing? Now, coming with AI images, the news that we see, like Delhi will look like this in 2050, that scares you, right? And that is what kids are consuming these days. Now, again, striking a balance between kids not at all consuming a news and how much do they consume, how much do they discuss, and are they consuming the news themselves or via their parents? So just to even educate them about this, that okay, maybe your parents' perspective is a little not right, or it's always grayish. So striking that balance has been tough, and which is why I think it's a good topic that we are discussing today. And I'm also looking forward to learn more and add to my classrooms.
Thank you for adding that, Namika. I think that's also a very, very valid point, right? I mean, none of us will dispute that it's important to know what's happening around you, and the news just proves to be a great tool to do that. But also to strike that balance between how much of it do you consume, how are you consuming it, are all questions that are definitely worth worth asking. And on that note, I'm also going to invite anybody from the audience, if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And I think with that, we can really deep dive into this theme or this topic that we have chosen for today. And the first thing that I want to do is pick up from where Namika left off, and talk about how do you strike that balance, right? I like I said, it's undisputed that we need to be aware, especially as students here, to be aware of what's happening in the world around us. But how do we balance that with what's happening within? When do we say, okay, that's enough, right? Or even as educators, how do we draw the line between encouraging our students to keep abreast with current affairs, but also letting them know that it's okay to take a break, right? And I'd love to hear everybody's perspective on this. So if there's anybody who'd like to start off, if you have some thoughts that are right there at the top of your mind, please take us away. And I'm going to invite everyone to just unmute and join the conversation as and when you have an idea to share. I think maybe it would be, yeah, go ahead, Namika.
Sorry. So one thing that I really realized at that time was that seeing a video was something that would really make me feel very, very scared, like scared, anxious, and totally on the edge. So I think realizing what is something that is putting you off the edge, that is a great way to build a boundary. So now all the news that I consume that are like, if you see Miss D'Souza, like how it's just a plain background and text
Right.
is written. I know what is happening and I don't go over the edge. So I think one point is to realize that what maybe pushes you, and then maybe that's not working for you. So like maybe seeing graphic images or videos is something that doesn't work for me. So maybe like again, maybe I think Soumya would be better input here, that how do you realize that boundary?
So you've been tagged, Soumya.
Thank you, Namika. Thank you for sharing that. As I was hearing all the conversation, I think I'm still on what Tina had shared, and it got me thinking that it must be so difficult to be in a position where not only are you expected to constantly consume that information, filter it out, and then put it out there. So thank you, Tina, for doing what you do. It's not easy at all. Adding on to what Namika said, I think that's a great point to think about. And I want to sort of break this down in a simple process for us to understand. First, we need to be aware that at the moment, since we are so connected on the internet, remember that the internet is also connected with you. The internet is watching you. So whatever you consume, it's going to give you a little bit more of that. And that's why our social media feeds are so catered to us. So someone who's watching all self-care, that's what they get. Somebody who's watching about the political environment of the country, that's all that they get in their feed. And it's very similar to how YouTube is working or any other app is working. They want you to stay on that particular app. That's how they're generating revenue. So first point is to remember that you are being information, but there are more aspects to this. Yeah. The second thing to remember would be to understand what is my body, how is my body reacting to something. So this would be, if I have to simplify it for you, there's a trigger that comes from outside. I read a particular piece of news. Suddenly I notice that I'm feeling fearful. To become aware of what is happening on the inside. And if you notice that my body is now either fearful, or I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, what am I experiencing because of this particular news? And the moment you feel like now my body can't take it anymore, I'll just explain why that happens in a moment. That is when you stop. That is when you put your phone down. Yeah. And you move on to trying out any sort of coping skill for yourself, which will help restore a sense of safety in your body. So when I say safety, anytime there's a trigger, whether it's happening to you or to someone else, your body is going to enter a response stage or a reaction stage. So either you start fighting, or you want to run away, or you will freeze in the spot. Yeah. This is when you know my body is now at its extreme, and now you need to regulate. So knowing when to put the phone down is very important. The world's not going to stop, but you can pause for a moment. I think I'll pass it on to Hafsa.
Yeah, I think I have a twofold approach to thinking about, how do you consume the news and maintain your sanity and mental health. And I think this is true for students and children and adults alike. I think number one is to be very like consciously aware of when, where, and how you're consuming news. I think we've come to a point where, I get my news on Instagram and I get my news on WhatsApp and I'm getting my news on YouTube and I'm getting it at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. and 8 a.m. And I think that has added to this information overload. I think as conscious like consumers of news, and especially as an educator who wants students to be active citizens, I want you to be consuming the news and caring about what's happening in your society and country and world at large. But it needs to be in a manner where it helps you like be informed and take action, and not just I know America may Hillary Clinton ne kaun sa state, like that might not be relevant. So I think one is being really conscious of what and where and how am I consuming news. Is it 1 hour in the morning? Is it 1 hour in the evening? Is it through this magazine that I know and trust and rely on the sources? Or is it via this app? I think some of those like primarily news reading skills that I'm sure you worked on a lot at NewsDD as well. I think that's number one. And I think number two, and this is a slightly more controversial opinion. There's a book that I read recently that said, don't read the news. And I think my biggest takeaway from that like analysis or that point of view was that we need to consume news or like current events in a way that helps us move into action and doesn't really give you the fallacy of I'm an engaged citizen. And I felt like that really mattered to me as well, especially during the COVID time when there was an information overload and I'm just sitting on the couch feeling dread and it's not moving me to action. Versus when there were specific times, what can I do in my immediate community? So I know that there is a shortage of oxygen cylinders. What can I do in my capacity? Like, can I fundraise or can I connect people to resources? And I think similarly, like during any protests that are happening, or, more recently, there are increased number of cases of bullying in, higher education institutions. I think for students to be very consciously aware of, this is what's happening in the current events, what is in my locus of control right now, so that I can move to action, and sort of like making peace with the part that, like we are not here to save the entire world, but I can plant seeds, and I can take action in my locus of control. So instead of going in a downward spiral of now I'm going to read news of global bullying and what's happening in the entire world and the stats just are not looking better, can I read the news about in my immediate environment and how it's affecting the stakeholders in my life and take an action. I think those two things have been helpful. Being very conscious of when, what, how, where, what news medium, and be, instead of, going in a global, trying to understand what's happening everywhere, be more local, think about what action you can take and move forward. Yeah.
Thanks. That's very, very interesting. It also made me think about, in the work that we do, we very often look at research on how the news is evolving and so on. And the Reuters Digital News Report, and I'd love for you to jump in on this, Tina, also talked about, how young people particularly are avoiding the news because a lot of time they're just left wondering, what do I do with this information, right? And that, I think, beautifully ties in with what you yourself have experienced and observed. And I think this would be a great segue to also jump in and ask Advait and Tina what they think on the subject. And for Advait, I particularly want to get a sense of, how you consume the news and what your personal experience, challenges, observations have been around that, particularly with regard to how you said, it does impact how you think, feel, and act. So if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So for me, how I consume the news, so like every morning I get the newspaper. So whenever I read it, first of all, it's mainly like I only read a few sections of the newspaper, but in that I just try to by firstly looking at the headlines, you can also tell a lot about the news itself, because the headlines are made so that you want to read the news, and they sometimes don't give the full show of what the article would be about, but still you can get a bit of information from that. So I first of all try to decide like which information do I really need, right? Because in the news, there's lots of information that's there, but not all of it is actually needed. And like many times, if I'm reading, for example, like currently there's the Russia-Ukrainian war. If I'm reading an article about it every day and I'm reading that these many people got killed and then those many people got killed, it's like I can't really do anything with that information further. So I look for that as well. And then one more thing that I feel like is very important for this topic specifically is solutions-oriented journalism, which I've also learned about during the internship course. I've like done an interview to 5 kids about it actually. So from what I've heard from them, it's very important. Like how solutions-oriented journalism is very important because you can learn about solutions, and instead of getting all the information but not being able to do anything with it, you can get like the bright side of it as well. So learn about the problems but also know that there are solutions basically.
Thank you for adding that, Advait. I think it's very, very valuable, and I think one question that I'm definitely taking away from what you said is to think about what information do we need to consume, right? And I think that if I had a penny for every time I was told to read the news as a kid, I mean, I'd be a millionaire today. But now I sit back and wonder if that's a good thing, right? That pressure to constantly be aware and updated, how much of that does one really need, I think is a question that we can try and address next. But before that, I would love for you to jump in on the conversation, Tina, and really give us the other side, as a creator of the news.
Actually, I think I'd like to begin with something that Hafsa mentioned and also Advait just spoke about. Sort of tight. I said that I joined in 2020, like the time where probably like most people should not have joined journalism because, that was like being hit with bricks one after the other. But prior to that, I was teaching in DU. So I also had like very close connection with a slightly older, probably batch of students, not at school, but like people who are entering adulthood, right? And and we used to have papers about communication and news writing and all of that, which I used to teach. And that was also the time when I had actively moved away from a prior journalism job because it had taken a toll on my mental health and I couldn't take it. And I realized I needed a break, which is where I was teaching. But there was always curiosity from students about, okay, but what does it mean to be, at the other end? Actually, coming back, I think I take on from what Advait said that that journalism cannot just be like, there's many deaths, there's many destructions, the society, the world going to hell, and then no solutions, right? And but also I feel like there's a fine line, which is why I said Hafsa and Advait don't point, I'm sort of bringing together. While when we sometimes try to look for what can we do, that I feel can also become a source of anxiety. Because if we are constantly feeling like there is a need to do something, sometimes you can't take news as it is. I think that is also like a filter that one occasionally needs to apply. Because that's what I learned, because like I said, that while you're creating, we are also consuming news because we have to filter out what we are doing. And then, for example, during the oxygen cylinder crisis, my parents back home both are old and they got COVID. And while I was here, I mean, they were in a better place actually, as opposed to Delhi where it was such a major issue. And there was this constant thing that, okay, I'm far away, I can't do anything, I can't actively. And then I had to regulate myself to understand that this is the best I can do, probably. But also that sometimes taking a step back and realizing there's no need to actively react or respond into action, I think is equally important. Like that's my 2 bit, because I feel like that helped me as a simultaneous consumer as well of news. And also the other point, I do agree that even if you look at a newspaper, there are sections, right? Which means that there's something for everybody, from entertainment to sports to, like, even when COVID was going on, and I agree that was the That was probably 80% of what was happening. There was also other things. There were also other things. There were also happy, I don't know whether to call it happy, but feel good stories about what people were doing. I feel like one of the things that I would probably do as a trick probably is that if you're reading a lot of doomsday, now you have to understand that we are the people. I was literally the person who was publishing that story about how many deaths every day. Okay. Like that was my duty for like 6 months. So every morning I had to make sure that the numbers go out, how many new infections, how many deaths and how many, and at some point, when I was doing it regularly, it became a thing. It became a number thing for me. So at some point we had to look for like, oh, is it increasing? If it's not, we'll not put out. Right. And it sounds very bad, but that is how it used to be. Right. But what was one of the strategies I used is that, okay, I am reading horrible things, but there were other news as well, which was happening about how, because there was lockdown, animals finally realized, oh, we can actually walk on the streets without probably people hitting us with their cars, at least in Delhi. So I feel like I'm not speaking as an expert. I'm probably just speaking in terms of strategies that help me, that sometimes it's good to balance those as well and not look for, is this solution based? Is this action based? Is this horrifying? Is this anything else? But sometimes like this made me feel better, for like, this made me feel good. This made me feel hopeful. Sometimes I feel like that is equally important. And you can choose the area, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be one section of the news. But I think that's also like a good way. If you can't think of anything else, I think just balance out what you're reading. If you can't keep away, maybe just balance out.
Soumya, over to you. I was anyway going to come to you because it made me also think about what you said, right? Like the internet is watching you. It's going to give you more of what you ask for or what you're already consuming. And I think that ties in beautifully with what Tina said. So over to you.
I just wanted to supplement what Tina is saying with a little bit of what research tells us about this. And there's in fact a whole body of research that talks about how when you balance out the news that you're consuming with positive events that are happening in the world, it helps you lower your cortisol levels. So they did a research. What they did was on the front page of a newspaper, they published what it would be considered as a positive news item. And this was a paper that was circulated to lots of people before they were heading out to work. At the end of the day, their stress levels were measured, and it turned out that most of them had a far more productive day, felt more friendly when they were going around because the world felt safer. They felt better about the work that they were doing. Their health was feeling better. So essentially what I'm trying to get to is that there are these news networks out there in the world. One of them is actually called the Good News Network. If you Google it, they've been doing this for the past 20 years or so, where they publish stories of humans coming together and acts of kindness. So for example, even when right now, if we look at what happened in Turkey and Syria and the earthquake, one body of information is about all the losses that have happened. And then there's this other body of information of people from around the world coming together to help out. What that does biologically to your body. Now remember that we were tribe people at some point, right? So our brains are attuned to looking for danger because we want to survive. And the moment you realize that, oh, there are other tribals, by tribals, I mean other humans that are helping me or helping other people get out of this dangerous situation, you move out of that, I'm in danger, my life is in danger, the life of my family is in danger, to, oh, okay, there is hope in the world. And so there is something that's actually happening to you biologically. Your stress levels are falling down. And because of that, you enter this state of being more receptive to what is happening. And that perhaps is going to put you in that solution-oriented mode that we are discussing, instead of entering a state of paralysis and all is lost.
Thanks for adding that, Soumya. And I'm going to quickly jump into ask the educators a little bit about this. I mean, we've talked about how it's really important for us to sort of balance the kind of information we're consuming, as both Tina and Soumya pointed out. And I'm wondering how we do that in a classroom, right? We talked about how firstly, taking the news to the classroom in itself is a challenge. But when you do, how do we make sure there's that balance between what we're talking to students that they absolutely need to know in order to stay aware, and whether that's a concept in itself at all that's worthy of our time, right? Over to you, Hafsa and Amika, if you have anything to add. And shortly after that, I would love to go into some of the questions that have come up on the chat.
Go for it, Namika.
No, please go ahead.
I think just one quick point that I was thinking about based on what Soumya and Tina also shared is of course, striking a balance between the types of news we are bringing to class. And I think B, being very cognizant about, like you mentioned, Asmita, like what is a topic that's really worth exploring in a classroom together. I think AIDS being very aware that students are consuming news. And then as an educator, is it my role to help them break down and access the news? Or is my role as an educator to make them aware of the sources through which they're getting their news and how they're analyzing it? And making sure that they're looking at multiple perspectives. I think that's what I did during my teaching time that I thought was very helpful for my students, was to make them aware of the sources from which they were getting their news, and then helping them keep these checks and balances of, there's another question on the comments also regarding this, about how do I pick something that I care about and stay aware on that subject versus thinking about all the causes and everything in the world and try to stay up to date about all of that. I think it's helping students strike that balance about this is a cause that you're passionate about, or this is a topic that interests you. How can you be aware about that and not try to consume all the news? So I think more consciously building that news appetite is important.
Consciously building your news appetite. I think I'm going to make a note of the exact terminology and use it again. Thank you for adding that. Namika, sorry, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, just a small point, like there is something, like I have also studied psychology. So there is something that we say Socratic questioning, right? So that is like sometimes when kids tell me, so they are pretty excited about telling news, right? So I sit 5 minutes, so they tell me certain facts, what they have read. So I ask them, where did you read it? So now they know that if they are going to tell me something, so they need to tell me from where they have been.
Right.
First time they said, ma'am, on WhatsApp, ma'am, I saw this YouTube video. So then I again asked them, okay, do you know from where this exact statement or this fact was taken? So just teaching them very subtly that you need to know from where this fact is coming. I mean, okay, YouTube might be a good way, but are we really sure about it? Have you fact checked it? So I did this with them in the class. So they said some fact about NASA, right? So I said, okay, let's check like what you said. So we went to the NASA website, we went to that particular article, and I said, yes, okay, it's true what you just said. So now they know how to filter out. And just to tell them that, okay, we are going to discuss about geography this week. So why don't you go look for certain facts, look in the newspaper, which has news related to this geographical concept. So that is what I try to do, making them read news at least. So there are a lot of kids, like at least here, who say that newspaper doesn't come at our homes. So like I think we all are from a generation where we would see our parents reading newspaper from start to the end, right? But now things are changing because even parents are digitalizing. So kids do not see newspapers. Their only source becomes this only: YouTube, Instagram, when they say see their parents, or maybe not even that, which is why it sometimes become tough also. So you are their source of giving them news, which is sad also, I think.
Very interesting that you point that out. And I was just thinking that, based on what we've discussed, there are a couple of things that we've identified here within this conversation itself that we as educators can do. One is, of course, help bring that sense of balance in news consumption, right? As both Soumya and Tina pointed out, if you're seeing a lot of problem-centric news, maybe educators can be people in your life who show you that not all hope is lost, right? That's definitely one. And then as both Namika and Hafsa rightly pointed out, we can also help them question or be critical of the information that they're consuming, both from a media literacy standpoint, where we're saying, what is the source of this information? Is it accurate? Can you verify it? And so on. But also more from a mental health perspective, if I can say so, right? To see that if a student is routinely consuming a kind of information that's entirely maybe negative or problem centric or may possibly have a detrimental impact on how they feel, then we can also be the voice that says, hey, maybe you need to take a look at another kind of information, or maybe you need to take a break, right? And I think with that, I want to jump in and ask Advait what he thinks of the matter. I mean, do you find that you have adequate support in school to talk about the news, or do you think that the school should be, or your classroom should be, a place where you get support on what kind of news should I be consuming? How much of it should I be consuming? And I think there's a question in the chat. Actually, wait, we'll take this one and then we'll go to the question in the chat. Sorry. Advait, would you like to try and answer that? Or have I really confused you?
Yeah, so for like having support about talking about the news or viewing the news at school, so in 5th grade, before the lockdown happened, we used to get the newspapers in class every day for everyone. We don't have that anymore. But back in 5th grade, we used to read it, like we'd have the specific time before the classes start. We'd read it that time. That's also where, like, that example that I was talking about COVID coming in the news in class, that's where that also came from. So they just give us the newspapers and encourage us to read it. But there was nothing much about them telling us that, like, this news is repetitive, or about negative news or fake news or any of that. So I think we used to get the NIE student edition newspaper. So yeah, that's the thing. We didn't get told anything about it. We were just given the newspapers. And right now, there's not much about the news that we're covering in school. In our social studies class, we do talk about current events if it's based on the topic that we're learning. But yeah, it's actually not very common nowadays for people to talk about the news, or at least with teachers. With my friends, I do talk about the news, but yeah, other than that, not really.
Thank you for adding that perspective, Advait, about, and I think I'm fairly certain that your experience is also the experience of thousands of children in the education system who do not have a sense of support at school, particularly when it comes to navigating current affairs. I also remember, and this is not my own experience, but that of another educator who I worked with, who used to teach primary school, I think grade 3, and she had a student, and this is when the CAA, NRC protests and so on were happening in the country. And she had a student in the class who belonged to a particular religious group, who walked up to her and asked her if she would have to leave the country, given this new citizenship register and so on. And the educator at that point felt very, very ill-equipped to answer that question, right? And it also made me think about, if we as teachers are supposed to provide this particular support, we also need to be equipped to be able to do that. And I would invite everyone to think about it. And I think it's very similar to what Tina pointed out, right? If as a journalist, you also, as a creator of the news, you're also being exposed to a number of traumatic stories. So while you may feel a sense of responsibility towards your readers, there's also this sense of struggle as you're trying to do your job on an everyday basis. And while we think about that, I'm actually going to invite Vinusha, who has a very interesting question on the chat. Vinusha, would you like to ask your question, or I'm happy to read it out otherwise?
Sure. Can you hear me? Hi. I was just wondering, because this is something that I struggle with, right? Obviously, there are causes, or there's news articles and information that's important to me, and that I want to follow or be involved with. So even if it's, well, negative news, I would still sort of take that in an objective way and see, okay, what can I do about it? But the thing is, if there's, I mean, a lot of causes which are obviously important to other people, and when I'm, for example, not sharing that news or not being involved, or especially in the age of social media when we're expected to just share and cause awareness, when I don't do that, there's also a sense of guilt that I feel, that I'm going to be labeled as being ignorant, or I'm going to be, it's just that I'm being selective of the pieces that I have. So how does one balance that out, right? Like, because obviously we can't be I don't know, holding the torch for every single thing or carrying everything forward, and we also do have our limitations. So yeah, how does one balance that out?
Thank you, Vinusha, for that question. I think I can see that everybody's sort of processing and figuring out how to tackle this. So I think it's safe to say that that's a rather heavy question and pertinent one that you've asked.
I mean, just to take that forward, I mean, where does our responsibility start and stop, right? Like, how do I mean, I understand that it's just not unlimited. All of us don't have the unlimited energy to talk about every single issue or every single cause, and so how do we sort of draw that line for our own sake of mental health as well as capacity as well in terms of doing something? Even if it's for instance, I'm an educator, if it's something related to education or within that domain, I know that okay, even if it's difficult, I can do something about it, or at least I know I have the contacts or I have the network talk about it. But if it's something that is important, I mean, which is a global crisis or something humanitarian, I know that I should be involved, but I also know that I have my limitations there. So how do I draw those boundaries without feeling guilty or without overwhelming myself?
Asmita?
Yes.
If you don't mind, can I just take a stab at that? Like, can I just try answer?
Yes, please do.
Which that's an interesting question, and trust me, I don't think there is one straightforward, solid answer. I'll just give you an example. So I work with like a lot of my newsroom is an exception, I would say, because a lot of us who work at my office are women, and we are all of a certain age group. And we all have different beats. Beats is, of course, I'm guessing you might know, is that different sectors we handle, right? Somebody handles crime, somebody handles entertainment, somebody handles health. And over the time, sometimes it's I think as creators, we struggle.
Tina, sorry, we lost the last few seconds. Do you want to say that again?
I'm so sorry. I think I have a call coming in, and I think my internet is dying because of that. I'll just quickly try to answer that. Sorry. What I was saying is, it's not just as a consumer, but also as creators. Sometimes we face, because see, we are journalists, so we are supposed to know everything that's happening. I think that's like one of the issues, right? And I have felt that as well. मुझे तो पता होना चाहिए. Like, I should definitely know about everything that's happening, but trust me, it's impossible. And I think at least the best way I have seen us going through with it is just have a discussion. If somebody says, oh, X is happening in this particular sector, and if you think you do not have enough information about it, or you are even completely unaware about it, I think the best way to take it forward is just ask, oh, why don't you tell me more about it? So that it becomes less about what you don't know, and it becomes more about, okay, I may not know, but I have curiosity about it, and maybe I'll search. So instead of the news immediately become your learning point, is community conversations become the starting point of you learning something that you may otherwise not be invested in. Of course, guilt, I understand, definitely comes in. I wouldn't say I have not felt that way in certain elements. Like some morning I go to office and everybody knows about one particular news, and I have come in completely clueless, and I start thinking, how do I not know? How did I miss this? I think it's a very genuine reaction for everybody. But I would say first tell yourself that it's an okay reaction, because it's just impossible to have all information about everything. Sometimes even Google fails, it gives 2 answers and then the page goes empty. So you can't really have that. But I think I feel, at least that's how I have taken it up, that I start with these conversations. So I feel less overwhelmed about the fact that, or guilty about the fact that I don't know this. And the first feeling in my head is of curiosity. Okay, I don't know about this, but maybe this person has read, can give me a brief insight. And then I choose whether or not I want to take this forward and add to my interest of knowing newer things. Yeah, but that's like my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a valuable one at that, I think. So thank you very much for adding to that. I think it also made me think about how, you know, the earlier part of our discussion was centered primarily around, you know, the nature of the news and how much of it do you balance, what kind of news do you consume to strike that balance. But I think I see the conversation gradually moving towards just the sheer information overload that tends to happen, because either, like Vinusha pointed out, you're feeling a sense of guilt on not knowing enough, or you're being shamed for being ignorant and not knowing about what's happening in the world around you and how you can possibly contribute to it. And really, I'm very grateful to you for bringing in that perspective, because even as I can't imagine the pressure on a journalist of having to know pretty much everything, right? And I didn't think about it at all till you mentioned it. So thank you so much for saying that and for enlightening all of us with that opinion. I'm going to invite everybody else on the panel to have a crack at this. I think there's a lot more to explore, and even from your own experiences or observations, if you have anything to contribute, I'm all yours.
I think to me, what stands out is what Vinusha has written on the chat, where she writes that being shamed or cancelled for not being involved with other issues. So I think part of the question, she answered it herself, where she said that it is not possible humanly to be up to date with every possible thing that's happening and probably take action on everything that's happening. So I'd say hold yourself with some compassion, that you are doing your best and you're doing what you can. And it's okay if you don't know everything. Second, right now we live in, like I said, a hyper-connected internet-based world where it's so easy to shame someone, so easy to cancel someone while you're sitting behind a screen on a phone. So I'd also say that step back a little bit and understand that you don't have control over somebody else's reactions or responses to what you are doing. The only thing in your control would be how are you reacting to their response. So, you know, when someone shames you or cancels you, that's actually saying a lot more about them and their inner world than it's saying about you. So hold your guilt and your ability to process information with compassion here, while understanding that this has more to do with the person in front of you, less to do with you. I wonder if that helps in some way.
Yes, thank you so much. It does.
I'm still processing what you said, quite honestly, Soumya. I think there's a lot to unpack there. So thank you so much for adding that. One thing that's really standing out to me, and possibly because this is confirmation bias, you said it's okay to not know everything. And while it's also one of the first lessons I learned as a teacher, I was fortunate that someone told me that if a student asks you a question and you don't know the answer, it's okay to admit that, right? And say, I may not have the answer, but I'm going to try and find it for you, or here's how we can find it together. But it also made me think about whether we do that enough as educators, right? I know that as educators, we're constantly telling our children to know more, to learn more, to be curious. And the news, of course, plays a critical role in that. But it also made me wonder whether, and Advait, I'd love for you to jump in here, whether we're also telling students that it's okay to not know everything, whether we're equipping them with thoughts and ideas and techniques, like both Soumya and Tina pointed out, that can sort of help them maneuver through this just enormous information ecosystem that they are constantly engaging with. So Advait, if that's something that you have something to add about, whether you are told or whether you have support in your life, whether it's from educators at school or your loved ones, who will tell you it's okay to not know everything, and sort of help find a balance in terms of not just the kind of information you're consuming, but just how much information that you're consuming. Like, does anyone ever tell kids it's okay to not know everything? Right? That's really what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, at school, I don't think there are any situations like that at all. But like at home, basically, my parents say that like it's good to read the news. You should know about what's happening in the world. I also enjoy doing these things called MUNs or Model United Nations conferences. Over there as well, you need to know a lot about what's going on in the world, and also you need to have good research skills to take part in things like that. I think where I learned the most about just the news in general and what limits should be there is from the internship course that I've done. Other than that, it hasn't really been talked about or discussed in school about like you don't need to know all the information, but it's sort of like there is like you need to know what's being taught in school. You need to revise that. You need to have you also need to have information from varied sources, and it has to be from it has to be news that's not only about one thing. So if we have, for example, in our social studies subject, they do teach us a bit about researching, but it's mainly just them saying that like Wikipedia is bad and don't use Wikipedia, but yeah,
Got it.
that's it.
Got it. Thank you for adding that. I think by the nods from the educators, I could tell that this is not an experience that's limited to you. We're, I think, all guilty of constantly pushing our students to know more. And I personally, and speaking just for myself here, as an educator, I don't think I've said enough how important it is to not know everything, to not pursue every nugget of information with crazy amounts of curiosity, right? Thank you very much for adding that perspective, Advait. I'm conscious of the time, and again, very, very grateful for all your valuable inputs. I think to close, I had one other question, which is primarily around whether the news can, will, or should change in order to accommodate for our needs, our changing needs in terms of particularly our mental health. But I'm going to just leave that there. So Tina, maybe if you want to address it in your closing, you can do that. But just to sort of close, I thought it would be great if we could all share what's on top of our minds, or if there's any particular piece of information we'd like to close this or leave our audience with. So if anybody who's ready can feel free to start us off. I'm going to give everybody a couple of seconds to process and think about it.
Yeah, so just our closing thoughts on the topic or an answer to the question?
Yes, your both are there. Both are there. Both. If you want to sort of include that, yeah.
Yeah, I can answer the question. So, as I had mentioned previously, right, solutions-oriented journalism, to me, I think it's a really good solution to all of this. But of course, it's not that easy for actual news companies to do it. I'm pretty sure like many people would have thought of it before. This is just something that I was able to research about and do on my own. But I just feel it's very important for that to be included, because when you use solutions-oriented journalism, again, even if it's your job to like publish the numbers in the paper, right? If you think about it, only giving the numbers can only take the reader so far, right? So in the end, the news is about giving the reader information, right? And people read the news so that they get perspectives, they get information, and they just get the knowledge that they need for just living in their lives, doing their jobs, all of those things. So I feel like solutions also have to be included in that, because the information can only get you so far.
It's very interesting, and I think very well put. even with the numbers, or even with whatever problem the news is covering, it only gets you so far, and it's possibly not the whole story, right? Maybe the numbers could also be around, and this is just, for something for us to think about, maybe hugely impractical, as Tina might tell us, but maybe the numbers could also be around how many people donated blood, or how many people were part of a particular solution, right? I mean, what if we could and did track all of those numbers and shared them along with all the other numbers that told you how problematic things are. I don't know if this is extremely utopian, so I'm going to quickly tag Tina in case you want to sort of close this piece out for us.
So as somebody who sometimes can be extremely overtly optimistic about things, I would be lying if I said that I have not thought of things in a similar manner. Like I said, since I was responsible for putting out that copy, like every day I would look at the numbers and be like, okay, I just want to also know something good because that's also me. I think anyway, newsrooms are looking at how to do news. I'm pretty sure generations by generations, people who have been in the industry for 20 years, as opposed to somebody who's been there for 5 years, there is constantly a push to do stories also, which are about the, for lack of better adjectives right now, probably the triumph of the human spirit, the triumph of, like I've mentioned before, hope. So I'll just give you a quick example. Recently, there was a story, it's a science story actually, about this student who'd solved this problem which nobody has been able to solve for thousands of years. And it was one of the most read news items on our website, as opposed to like, because we often say that we are very attracted, vicarious is the word I'll use, we're very attracted to also doom and violence, like fortunately, unfortunately. So when we see those numbers, when we see those devastations, we also automatically unable to pull ourselves away. But that is also a story that sort of balances out that idea that people want to know both sides of it. And coming back to it, like I would say that I wouldn't call it impractical, but I would just say that, I mean, people are trying, even as journalists, I think we are trying to have stories that are not simply about grinding out this happened and that form of violence happened, and it's just nothing is working out. But I think there is also now a push across newsrooms to do more storytelling, because at the end of it, as human beings, that's what we relate to. Like you said, information, yes, is the primary job of probably a news organization. But I think slowly, with younger people coming in, I think there is also a move towards going towards storytelling, a move towards understanding that news cannot be how it was 50 years ago. News cannot be how it was pre-COVID. If you get stuck, you will just become a dinosaur and just like move away. So I would just say, but yes, I can also say that there are other kind of pressures going on for the companies and the journalists. So maybe we are not at the best of it right now. Maybe we've just reached 10% of it. But I just want to leave with an optimistic view that I personally, like for me, I don't know how possible it would have been to push for a mental health show before it started in 2021. I could only push for it because I said that, look, I have been on the receiving end of it. I know people, who come and tell me that they have been on the receiving end of, if nothing else, this can be a starting point, and it did. But I don't know if it would have been possible in 2019. So I would want to honestly look at that positive development and say that there is space. But yes, honestly, journalists also have to push for that space. It will not come on a platter at all. Especially because, unfortunately, people who are running these organizations are of a certain age and of a belief system and school of thought. So you'll have to probably push.
Thank you so much for adding that. And I think this might be a valuable nugget to add here when we're doing the reimagining media program with students. The idea behind which is simply to get them to reimagine media. We tell them to play this game, which is called the BBC iReporter, and anybody here is welcome to try it out. You basically have to simulate, it's basically a simulation of the experience of being a reporter, where you have to balance just the speed at which you have to put out the news with accuracy and so on. And it's really a great insight into how it's a huge challenge to be able to put out new information at breakneck speed and ensure that it is accurate. And it also makes you think about the kind of toll it takes on your own well-being when you're always pressed against the clock. Thank you very much for adding that, Tina. I'm going to quickly tag so either whoever's actually ready, Soumya, Hafsa, Namika, if you have any closing thoughts, we're all yours.
I think I'd like to close with just one simple statement. Seek help if you need it. If you're feeling overwhelmed by what's going on, you don't have to handle it by yourself. There are specialists out there who can help you. It could be talk therapy, it could be movement therapy, it could be art therapy, it could be nervous system regulation. Know that you don't have to handle it by yourself. There was a question in the chat which I was reading. Smiley wrote that it's difficult to process the news about gun violence, and that's very understandable because you feel threatened. You're also, I'm not sure if that's a new place for you to be in, but maybe it is. The country might be new. Seek help. Yeah, go to a therapist, process this information with them, and that'll help you navigate it much better.
Thank you for saying that, Soumya. And also, I think my apologies are in order, Smiley. I think I missed that question, but I think Soumya has answered it partly. But if there's anybody else who would like to add to it, please feel free to. Again, my apologies on having missed it. Hafsa, Namika, over to you. Whoever's ready.
Yeah, I think just want to close out with, of course, saying a +1 to what Soumya also said, that, if you feel overwhelmed, and I think it's so funny when I started therapy actually because I was very overwhelmed with the news. So I think really +1 to that. I think also just be kind to yourself when you're consuming the news, like consume it consciously. Don't try to, do everything and know everything. Be very aware of where your news is coming from, when it's coming from, and try to bring your energy and your passion into what's your locus of control, and not get paralyzed with everything that's happening. Yeah.
I mean, I think truer words have not been said. So thank you for adding that. Namika?
Yeah, so I think with the definition of current news being changing, like maybe earlier it was 24 hours before was current. Now 1 hour ago is the current news. So I think we need to stop putting that kind of pressure on us, need to know on the current basis, right? And the other very good thing that I learned here, and I think I will apply that as well, that we need to set example for kids that it's okay if you don't know. Maybe tomorrow in the classroom I'll sit and I'll tell them that, okay, I don't know this, why don't you tell me? Like Tina also pointed out, community building, right? So maybe I'll talk to them and I'll ask them that, okay, why don't you tell me? Because I also don't know. I might know something about my own field, but there are certain things that you are reading, you know better than me. So just to set that, okay, the teacher also doesn't know, so it's fine if you don't know.
Thank you for sharing that, Namika. And we're 15 minutes over time, so I want to apologize to all of the panelists for holding you back longer than you had expected or anticipated. But also thank you so very much. I think more than anything else, I have learned so much today, and I'm very, very grateful to all of you for that. We're also going to be sending you a quick feedback form in your email. So if you have any thoughts on how we can make this conversation, such conversations, a more enriching experience for panelists, students, everybody alike, we would love to hear more on that. But most of all, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be here today. It's been phenomenal listening to you. I have a whole notebook full of notes that I have put together through this call. And I think that says it all. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for joining and your adding questions and comments to this discussion. I hope you have a great Sunday ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. I just wanted to say it was wonderful. I learned so much, and I think my head was buzzing with, this is not something I've thought of. So this has been like a really wonderful Sunday, and honestly, learned so much from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you. That means a lot, really.
Same here. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Namika. Thank you, everybody, for engaging. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.